Hey, Corey.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Amazing.
Awesome. I think we'll let maybe like a few people just trickle in here. We've already got 35 people on the call, which is awesome. So maybe we'll just wait like a minute and then we can kind of get started.
Yeah.
Just while we're letting people on, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Dr. Alexandra Smith, one of the naturopathic doctors at Neurvana Naturopathic Medicine. And I'm here with Corey Deacon, and we're going to talk about gut health and the gut-brain connection tonight. So really excited to kind of dive into this topic. We'll just, again, we'll wait maybe till 7:02, and then we'll kind of let her roll and dive in. Corey, do you know if this is recording already?
It is.
Okay, fantastic. Then I won't mess around with it on here.
Don't touch it.
Cool. Well, yeah. I mean, do you want to just kind of dive in to what we're chatting about today?
Yeah.
In terms of gut-brain connection, I mean, I think starting there and then kind of moving through ways that we can help support gut and gut health and inherently support that gut-brain connection is probably where we'll go from here, but kind of just like laying the land, I think would be helpful to start.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so the my journey with this really started in the brain, and looking at the brain function and the central nervous system, and with a neuroscience background, that was kind of the focus. And as you start doing that, you start all of a sudden starting to recognize this other nervous system that's going on called the enteric nervous system and the gut. And I remember, for me, it was, okay, so we got this brain and we have the central nervous system, and then we got this gut, and the brain and the central nervous system run the gut. That's what happens, right? And then you go and you start learning about the gut and all of its connections and microbiome and all these things happening, and then you go, wait a minute, the gut runs the brain. So then you go back up and you go, I think it's a chemical connection, and you go, no, it's an electrical connection, and then you realize, oh, they're in a relationship together. Mm-hmm. Oh, I get it now. So today is going to be a little bit of a deeper dive into the relationship that the gut and we say the brain, but really the nervous system, the central nervous system are, and the gut has its own nervous system. And so the relationship that they have between each other.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting, all the research that's come out about this, right? In terms of the neurotransmitter production that happens in the gut, and how that can affect mental health, right? And if we don't have our guts working appropriately in terms of the way that they build those neurotransmitters, then that's significantly going to affect how that central nervous system is regulating, right? Which, you being the neuroscientist, maybe we can do a bit of an overview, Corey, in terms of those like neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different neurotransmitters. I think the two really important ones that we can focus in on are dopamine and serotonin. So when we live our daily lives, one of the greatest measures of happiness is the ability for us to be able to connect with the external world and bring in what's happening in the external world, and then internalize or make sense of what that means and how that then guides us to the next movement that we make. So as an example, you know, I'm speaking right now, I'm talking. It's obviously very hard when I can't see many of you to know how you're responding. So I'm just going to assume that you're loving it so far. That'll be my bias, of a dopamine bias. So I'm using feedback from my world to figure out, okay, I'm saying this thing. What's the response around me to that thing that I'm saying? And then what does that tell me about what my next movement is, right? So if I say something and everybody looks at me like a deer in the headlights, I'm like, okay, I gotta adjust what I'm saying, right? Or if everybody's sitting there nodding and they're like, yeah, Corey, you're amazing. Wow, keep going. Then I'm like, okay, I can keep going, right? And so the ability for me to interpret my reality and then change how I show up from that movement, and then interpret again to figure out what my best alignment is in my reality is essential for us to actually find the alignment within ourselves and find what brings us joy and what brings us happiness. So dopamine is more of a frontal lobe neurotransmitter. So we obviously, most of us have heard of dopamine and like the dopamine addiction and all that. So dopamine is what we use when we are externalizing and using executive function to sort of organize and execute how we show up. Okay. Any pursuit that I have of something will need dopamine for me to do that. That includes a movement of my arm. That includes the movement of my mouth. And that also means if I need to move towards something, or if I have a motivation, I think of achieving something, anything outside of the here and now. Okay. That's the best way to describe dopamine, is it's everything outside of the moment. Okay. And then serotonin is kind of the opposite. It functions more in the parietal regions, or a network that we call the default mode network, which is a lot of our sense of self. So all of my senses integrate back here, and that's where I make sense of them. So if I am showing up in the world and somebody has a certain response, I make the decision on what that response means about me, right? So sometimes I can be like, oh, so this person got really angry with what I had to say. I can be like, oh my God, I'm terrible. I'm the worst person ever. I should have said it differently. I should have. Or I can go, oh, I guess they're having a hard time right now, right? So how I interpret that is based in the serotonin response. So if I have a problem with serotonin response in the back of my brain, I tend to take things more personally that are happening around me. And I also tend to be more withdrawn, more internalized, more anxious, and sensory information can feel very overwhelming. Same with emotional information. Okay. If I'm deficient in dopamine, I tend to keep looking outside of myself to feel good. So I'm always looking for that next substance, or that next supplement, or that next diet, or that next, and so I can get into a chasing and a seeking sort of energy, rather than being in a place of openness to what's around me and just paying attention to what's happening and sort of witnessing what's happening. So those are the two probably most important dynamic systems. We also have GABA and glutamate that sort of operate as yin yang balancing forces, where GABA is the overall brake pedal for the nervous system. It shuts everything into a slow down state. So alcohol is a GABA agonist, so it triggers GABA, it slows everything down. And then on the other side, we have glutamate, which speeds everything up. It's excitatory. Okay. So these four neurotransmitters are either made in the gut, or the precursors for them are created in the gut by a lot of our microbiome. And then the demand for them is triggered by the brain. So the brain actually tells the gut what it needs to start making. and then the gut can make it and shuttle it back up. So that's kind of that on a basic level, kind of how that all functions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great overview and kind of gives an understanding of why focusing on gut health can be really important in these areas, right? When we're seeing anxiousness tendencies or low mood tendencies, right? That as we do kind of our comprehensive intakes that we do as practitioners, we start to piece together how that might be affecting someone, right? And are there gut symptoms alongside it? And it makes sense to maybe do an analysis of the gut microbiome to kind of figure out, are there the beneficial bacteria in that patient that can then make these neurotransmitters appropriately, right? Or are we seeing signs of inflammation that might be affecting that? Or what does diet look like? Are we even feeding those beneficial bacteria at this point, right? So it's all like very interconnected, right? When we think about this in terms of nervous system regulation with the gut microbiome.
And then there is the other side, which is the centralized component.
Totally.
Which is where at our clinic we do quantitative EEG. So we do a brain map of looking at how the brain is functioning on different levels, from unconscious, subconscious to conscious, as well as sort of inflammatory processes, slower frequencies that tend to connect with the gut. And then we have this opposite thing too, where if the gut can obviously feed back, if it's having problems, it can feed that back up and the brain can start suffering. And also if we have things like early developmental trauma, or we've learned to hold our emotions in and suppress and not express, anger and sadness are the two most common ones, culturally unacceptable. And we hold all that energy, it's going to eventually head down this path called the insula, and it's going to start shutting the gut down, because basically when we're in emotional and psychological survival, it's not necessary for the gut to run at full efficiency. It's actually sending resources to other tissues like muscle tissue, like other parts of the brain that are more associated with the limbic system, which is the survival system. We're taking resources from the frontal lobe and from the gut. And so now we get into this long-term issue where the gut goes leaky, the motility is slow, and it's actually more of a centralized problem in the brain and the nervous system that's doing that. So it's this relationship, right? So yeah, really, for us at the clinic, it's really important that we look at both ends of that relationship, right?
Totally. And it's really common to see that sometimes those symptoms that we see in the gut maybe don't fully resolve with only focusing on gut protocols, right? And then once we look at focusing more on whether it's neurofeedback or looking at that QEEG neuroanalysis and understanding if there's any sign of inflammation, then we kind of open up other areas that maybe need further support, right? And then we get that kind of restoration back to baseline, which is awesome, right? And that's kind of the goal, I think, with, I know my work and your work, Corey, too, right? We want to restore body to homeostasis, right, and baseline, so that we don't have to rely on things like supplements to make us feel better necessarily. Which with the gut, we often need things to get those good probiotics back in, right, and those beneficial bacteria, and treat whatever needs to be treated. But then we do let that diet lifestyle take over long term for things like this.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because it's the body's nature, and the mind as well, that our entire being its nature is to be in healing. And I think that's a really important takeaway from if you can take anything away from this webinar, is that any symptoms that are coming up are a check engine light. They're not a diagnosis in themselves, in my opinion. They're a check engine light that's coming on, and there's a signal that the system is sending to say, hey, something's not quite right here. And when we get the system back into the parasympathetic response, which generally just requires that we get things out of the way that aren't supposed to be there, and we give the body what it needs so that it can make enough energy that it can heal, then we don't need to be in these hyper restricted diets and taking 100 supplements a day, right? Like, we should be able to, obviously eating close to nature, but we should be able to actually live life without having to constantly be chasing a symptom down or trying to regulate something in the body with something else other than what it's just supposed to have, right?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, of course, they have their time and place for things like this, right? We know that if there's some kind of infection in the gut, and Corey briefly mentioned leaky gut, where essentially the small cells that line the gastrointestinal tract, those enterocytes, they aren't sitting nice and tight together anymore. So they're sitting kind of leaky, and we'll see larger particles or toxins that can pass through to the bloodstream. And so that's what we mean by leaky gut phenomenon. And that often happens when there's some kind of infection or overgrowth in the gut. So we'll see it with yeast overgrowths or bacteria that are growing in the gut within that microbiome that shouldn't necessarily be in there, parasites, viruses. We can test for all these things to understand if that is happening and if there are signs of inflammation in the gut. And then it helps us hone in on what exactly needs to be treated. And often we'll see actually decreases in those beneficial bacteria, which I'd love to get into. Kind of the three main ones that have a lot of the research on them are lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and akkermansia species, right? And those are the kind of like the three big bacteria that we want to see in the gastrointestinal tract in terms of helpful for regulating immune system, right? And supporting production of these neurotransmitters, which is so important for the nervous system. Corey, I know you've done quite a bit of research into like light exposure and with how that regulates some of these beneficial bacteria. I'd love for you just to kind of like open up the conversation there.
Yeah, one of my favorite topics. So I discovered I found the research and was guided to people that had already discovered this.
Right.
Getting a little egotistical there, but I came across this when I'm very familiar, and I've worked a lot with something called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which most of you, if you've ever heard of, like mold toxicity, Lyme disease, post-COVID syndrome, a lot of these are actually a condition called chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which basically means that once we've gotten a certain exposure, inflammation's got high enough, it gets us stuck in this loop of inflammation. And even though we might be away from the source of the problem, like, oh, we move out of the moldy house, or, oh, COVID's gone, but I'm still in this symptomatic state, and I'm fatigued, I'm in pain, and I have all these other things going on. So I've recognized this connection between a hormone called MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, and why people were getting multi-systemic problems. And so when you understand this hormone, what this hormone does is it actually tells the cells of the gut to seal themselves up, what are called tight junctions. So if you've heard of leaky gut, when you have leaky gut, the tight junctions break apart, and then the immune system gets really inflamed in that area, and it starts signaling the rest of the body that it's dealing with a problem. And this eventually gets up to the brain, and then it shuts down serotonin, melatonin production, and everything goes haywire. So I started recognizing that MSH is actually released when we get ultraviolet light exposure. And interestingly enough, as a society, we have lived more of an indoor lifestyle than we ever have in all of human existence, up until the point. And COVID was really revealing, because COVID, everybody got really sick and had all these problems. And we got post-COVID, and the response was to stay inside. And when you start understanding how sunlight works, there's two pieces. There's the actual light, actual light comes into our body, and it has all these interesting ways that the body delivers light into a structure called mitochondria. And mitochondria make energy. That's the the powerhouse of the cell. They're like these little energy generators that are humming in our cells, and they can divide. They're derived from ancient bacteria, so they can divide. So you can have many hundreds, thousands in a cell. And if you have a healthy cell, you have usually thousands. And light is actually needed to tell those guys what to do. And then you have another piece where the body needs to have a signal that tells it when it's daytime and when it's nighttime, because we're like a race car. We can drive around the track all day long and drink our coffee and go. As long as we make a pit stop at night and maintain and replace and repair everything that we need to from driving around the track all day, we're in good shape. But we have this thing now in our environment called LED light. And LED light has this really high blue light signal in the spectrum. And it turns out that blue light is what is a circadian effector, which means it affects the information that's telling our body when to wake up and when to go to sleep. So it turns out that a blue light signal in the environment tells the body that it's time to wake up and to fire all of our energy up. And then red and infrared light signals tend to tell the body to calm itself, to calm down and head into sleep and regeneration and repair, which happens when it gets dark. So there's the circadian rhythm of when we wake up and when we sleep, constantly cycling, is programmed by light. So when I have a nice bright sunlight in the morning and it's nice and dark at night, my body gets the signal to repair and regenerate. And then in the morning, I wake up and I'm good to go. Turns out that our bacteria in our gut have the same circadian rhythm. So there's certain bacteria that are involved in different processes associated with metabolism, hormone production and neurotransmitter production, which happens earlier in the day for the hormones that operate on a diurnal cycle. When we get poor exposure to light, meaning I don't get sunlight during the day, I just get it through a window. So I get about 10 log scales too little light, which is massive. Exponential reduction of light exposure. Even though I might look like I have natural light, I'm not getting it. I blunt the wake up rhythm. And so I don't get this strong metabolic response. It's kind of blunted. And then at nighttime, I get the blunting of the sleep rhythm because I get all this artificial light blasted into my eye, right? So I don't have this nice, strong circadian wave like the tides in the ocean. It starts getting weak. So now I'm not sleeping and repairing effectively, and I'm not firing up my engines properly. And what ends up happening is the mitochondria actually get damaged. And that when they get damaged, we can't make energy appropriately. And so what I also say with the gut brain that's really interesting is that the gut, and particularly the cortex of the brain, especially the frontal lobe, are not very essential for survival. So they're actually the two areas that when we go into this metabolic deprivation and this lack of repair, it's the resources tend to get taken from those areas first and foremost. Because if I'm running from a bear, I don't need to digest food. I don't even need to move stuff through my gut, really, because I can live for like a month without food if I really had to, right? And then the frontal lobe, I don't really need to sit there and contemplate about the meaning of life if I'm running from a bear, right? And I don't need to think about what I need to do tomorrow or the conversation I had a few days ago and reflecting upon that, right? It's like, no, I gotta just deal with this situation, right? So these resources get directed. So the light situation also kind of brings you back to the mitochondria situation, which is a battery problem, where our battery, which actually is water in our body, is not charging itself properly. And then we have less resources to use in areas that aren't as important for survival. And so then what happens is you end up with these long-term gut issues, and then at the same time, brain-related issues. And it's like, oh, wait, okay, so one of these is connected, right? And it's like, what is it? right? Okay, well, I think we got to work with the microbiome. Oh, that's not working. Okay, I think we need to work with the brain. And sometimes the relationship actually brings you back to that. So that's one of the first things that I always recommend for people is really get conscious and intentional about your light that you're being exposed to. And then that bridges sort of into the electromagnetic frequency piece as well, which is getting as much natural electron exposure as possible, which is basically from the earth. So we have natural frequencies from the earth called the Schumann resonance. The earth also happens to be this endless source of electrons for our mitochondria as well, which is how we charge our battery. And you can look at some of the really interesting research on grounding and earthing and the effects on the immune system, inflammation, GI function. So generally what I tell people is like, when the sun is out, get lots of sunlight as much as you can, even if it's 5 minutes in the morning here and there. And then when it's dark, you should be protecting yourself, especially from LED light, orange or red blue light blocking glasses. And then there's apps you can get on the computer. We can send a light handout out that walks people through how to get their light right, using incandescent bulbs. So like the salt lamp, Himalayan salt lamps, that's all my wife and I use in our place at night is just the Himalayan salt lamps, or if we have incandescent. And then the grounding sheets that you can put on your bed. And that actually allows you to get electrons, and you need to ground it outside with a grounding rod kit. So we can also send. Don't put it in a ground port of the plug of the wall. You'll just actually pull more electrons away from yourself if you do that. But getting those two pieces right really helps set the stage for getting the microbiome regulated and a lot of the nervous system, because like everything is running off of this connection. I like to say that life itself is the love affair between the sun and the earth. All the information for life on earth comes from the sun, and the earth holds the capacity for all of the earth, all life to flourish. We are no different. We are this water crystal battery that sits in between positively charged sun and the negatively charged earth. And that's like our battery charger. And so that is always like foundationally the things that I discuss with people especially when it comes to this gut brain piece. So.
Yeah. And there is research to show that, like you were talking about with kind of like hormone regulation in the morning, right? Is that the bifidobacterium and the lactobacillus are much more active early on in the day, right? And they're less active at night. And that is all surrounding that light exposure. And so the more that we're able to be outside in sunlight, and yes, it's cold out right now, but like bundle up, you just need your eyes exposed. This is not about getting vitamin D on your skin. Unfortunately, at this time of year, we don't make anything right from the sun, but this is more about getting light into the retina of your eyes. And that's what helps with this regulation. And if we're just like zeroing in strictly on the gut microbiome, not all the other lovely benefits of light exposure, it's really the piece of that bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, which are so important for the integrity of the gut microbiome, and really important for the way that we build our neurotransmitters, super important for our immune system regulation, our ability to break down our food appropriately so that we can pull all those nutrients from the good things that we're eating, which helps with protein formation for hormone synthesis. Light is so vital. I think all of us are really quite passionate about light protocols with our patients for that reason, because the research is extensive in this area, which is fantastic.
And it's free.
And it's free, totally. It's free, and it's something that you can do forever, right? We can always do something like this. What are your thoughts, Corey? Like, it's dark out right now in the morning. Lots of people head to work and are inside and starting their day before the sun comes up. Curious your thoughts on like red light therapy in the morning if you're getting ready for work. Something like Cala lamp is a good company here in Canada. Yeah, curious what your thoughts are, if you do recommend that, if you don't recommend that.
Yeah, we're always gonna, when we live in indoor life, we're always deficient in red, infrared, and ultraviolet light, because energy efficient windows are energy efficient for our wallets and energy inefficient for our mitochondria.
Mhm.
So take your pick. But you're always going to be deficient in the red and infrared. And so, yes. Those ones you can use really safely.
Mhm.
And I do recommend infrared. We're really lucky because we have a wood burning stove in our cabin. So we're golden on the infrared.
And the infrared, yeah. Nice.
Yeah. And like fire is incredible.
Mhm.
But yeah, adding it later in the day, you can do it early morning. Red light in the morning. We're not really typically getting a lot of infrared light
Mhm.
in the morning. That's usually the time of a lower amount of infrared. Later in the day, we'll have more infrared and through the early evening. So it's kind of, I always just say, like, ask what's nature doing.
Mhm.
That you don't necessarily need it, but what I would recommend people do, it's a bigger problem to have the bright artificial light at night because the retina is more sensitive to light exposure at that time. So a lot of research shows 30 seconds of LED light exposure can reduce melatonin release by 90% in some individuals.
Mhm.
30 seconds. So it's like incredibly sensitive at that time. Earlier in the morning, the artificial light doesn't have as much of an impact on like waking your brain up too terribly early. But I
Mhm.
do recommend that people take a break at work if they can, even if it's only for 2 minutes or 5 minutes as the sun is coming up and facing east. It makes a huge difference when you get consistent with that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, that's awesome. I think I totally agree in terms of the more you can get the actual sunlight, the better,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
And then these other things are kind of supplemental to
mhm.
that, right?
And that's important too, is supplemental.
Mhm.
There is no replacement for the sun. We
Mhm.
can't, we don't even come close. We not even close to the light that's coming from the sun. So,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
you can definitely get an edge more by learning how to optimize. And if you really get things figured out, you can use even a UV lamp
Mhm.
in winter. However, I recommend cold exposure
Mhm.
over UV, which some people sort of get a little bit angry at me about when I tell them to get cold. But
Right.
because cold is actually a buffer for the lack of sun. It
Mhm.
sensitizes us to a hormone called leptin, which is the opposite to melatonin. And it plays a huge role in the gut. It's
Mhm.
like massive. And a lot of people, if you have a significant enough leptin problem, you'll be brain fogged, fatigued, you'll get weight gain, hormone problems, and you'll also tend to have sleep issues.
Mhm.
And so stubborn weight gain is the biggest one. Like, it doesn't matter how much I exercise or what I eat. It's some people even just keep gaining weight.
Mhm.
That cold exposure is incredible for that. And yeah, it's again funny. Nature gives us the solution constantly. It's just like engaging at that more. But the UV light can also be used. But the cool thing now is new research is out that we can actually produce our own UVC light
Mhm.
from cold exposure if it's cold enough for long enough, which is really fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And just as a caveat, I wouldn't necessarily recommend just like diving into a cold tub for
No.
2 minutes when you're first learning. But great to have a practitioner kind of walk you through how to do proper
Mhm,
cold exposure, because it can be so beneficial alongside
mhm,
light and yeah, eating a good balanced diet, getting outside, reducing stress, right?
mhm,
Um, you mentioned a bit, Corey, about parasympathetic nervous system. We
mhm,
talked a little bit about like running away from a bear, but maybe we can just dive into the difference of those two nervous systems and how they affect the gut
mhm,
and the enteric nervous system, which enteric, just so you guys know, is the gut brain nervous system
mhm,
that's heavily affected by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system responses.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, so the parasympathetic system is basically our rest and digest system of our nervous system. The
Mhm.
sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight. And then we have another one, which we won't, but it's called dorsal vagal. It's the fainter freeze, but that's basically when you've overwhelmed the fight or flight so badly that you go into a play dead response. But there's this essential balance that happens between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system. So rest and digest, fight or flight. We need both. We should mostly be in rest and digest state. But when we inhale, our heart speeds up, our lungs grab oxygen, and that starts getting delivered. We go into a little bit of a fight or flight state. And then we exhale, we go into rest and digest. And we should be going through this cycle all the time where we're in this perfect balance, this perfect harmony. When we have threats or stressors, which can be environmental, so that could be the artificial light at night in your environment, or too much Wi-Fi exposure, or mold, or air pollution, or heavy metals, or what, or it could be infections, or it could be lack of nutrients, or it could be emotional dysregulation, or it could be a stressful work relationship, or we have all these different levels of our being. We can have stressful thoughts that wrap us up and get us into ruminations. All of those kind of stack up in this, what's called the autonomic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells how much stress is in the system. And if we have a stress tank, so it's like our metabolic capacity is this big. As soon as we overflow that with stressors, the autonomic nervous system starts going into fight or flight. It starts, and it doesn't move into the rest and digest, which is more of, again, it acts as a signal. Okay, too much stress in the system. What do we need to look at? What do we need to do? How do we get away from this stress, right? And once that happens, the healing response shuts off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we were talking about earlier, is that we have an endogenous healing response that will never be able to be replicated. We'll never be able to make a vaccine that works better than the immune system does at dealing with something. We'll never be able to make an IV therapy that works better than the body's own system does at healing. We can give it information, and that's as naturopaths and as, for me, a functional medicine practitioner, that's the best thing that I can do for somebody is get the stress tank emptied so that they can go back into that rest and digest state. That is where they will spontaneously start to actually heal. And if I can stay in a balanced place of the fight or flight and rest and digest long term, I'll heal more and 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 more. And I'll just keep healing until there's no more healing that's needed. Right. So that's a little bit of the trick with gut brain, is really like what's going on in the gut, what's going on in the brain, what's putting load on the stress tank, and what is shrinking our metabolic capacity. So we want to expand the metabolic capacity, make the tank bigger so it can hold more stress before you get stuck in the fight or flight. And also, how do we guide that nervous system back to that rest and digest? And that's where, a lot of the testing and stuff can come in, right? Is that actually, because everybody is a little bit different. The stressors that I have are not going to be the same stressors that Dr. Smith has, although we may have similar symptoms showing up and we might meet similar symptom criteria. It's like, oh, I have IBS and anxiety too. And Dr. Smith's like, yeah, me too. And it's like, oh, okay, well, we should probably just do the same thing, right? Same treatment for everybody. And it's like, no, it's going to be different. We have a whole different story. We have different memories. We have different trauma patterns. We have different ways that we've ate. We have different environments that we've been exposed to, being exposed to. I'm a man, she's a woman. That has different cultural level differences and how we feel like we sometimes need to show up, and the stress that might come with that, right? So there's all these different, and so for us, it's really about looking deeper at like, okay, fundamentally, what is the fundamental fabric of what is causing these issues for you? And oftentimes, I know, Dr. Smith, you have the same experience. It's not just one thing, right? It's not just one thing. There's multiple misalignments on multiple different levels that are leading to this tank getting so full, right? I remember when I was ill, eventually it started hitting my gut. I literally every system flew out of whack for me, but eventually it started hitting my gut, and I couldn't touch gluten. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't even have something that had gluten in the same oil as it, and I would like feel like I was going into a panic attack. And looking back now, I recognize how much that really spoke to just how out of whack everything was, and how poor of an ability I had to go into the rest and digest state. Now I don't eat it all the time, but I could eat it all weekend if I wanted to. And I would be fine. Right. I generally do a good job. I like to say it's like an 80-20 thing. Like 80%, 90% of the time, yeah, treat yourself well. Right. And then the other 10%, okay, well, if you want to cheat a little, you shouldn't feel these like massive repercussions from that. Your body should be able to fill up with a little bit of stress and then empty without blowing the lid off the top and sending you into this fight or flight. So that's the simplest way to really speak to every single disease, disorder, and symptom is you've moved out of the rest and digest, or what we call parasympathetic state, too much. And you're not healing and repairing. And so it's all about just figuring out why that is. And for some people, they've gone so far that they've gone into the nervous system overwhelm or the shutdown, which is called the dorsal vagal. Right. Which is really just another division of fight or flight. But it's basically like the lion caught me and I can't fight the lion anymore. And now I play dead. And now I'm hopeless. I'm helpless. I'm completely fatigued. I don't even feel like talking to anybody. And I'm preparing for death, which means I might even feel like I don't want to live anymore. Right. And there's a really more intense degree of that as well. So
totally. Yeah. Yeah. And it is fascinating the way that our gut can be so affected by everything that you just described, right? Gut symptoms are super common, right? And they can be a host of different things for different people, right? I think bloating is probably the most common thing I see in my practice in terms of a clue that there might be something off there, right?
Yeah.
But changes in bowel movements, whether you have diarrhea or constipation, discomfort or indigestion with a lot of foods that you eat is a clear indication there might be something more to that, right? We should be able to eat whole foods and digest those well and feel good, right? And absorb all those nutrients from that. And so if that system isn't functioning properly, yes, it could be something that's in the gut. Absolutely, right? Could be a dysbiosis or some kind of overgrowth in the gut, but it could be something else, some other stressor like Corey just talked about. So this is why comprehensive intakes are so helpful, right? Because we could piece together where we need to look for testing so that it's being done in a comprehensive and indicated manner, right? And then we are treating truly the root cause of what's going on.
And assess the nervous system, assess the nervous system, because you can't even tell with neurotransmitter testing, you can't actually tell how that's functioning. Because there's receptors, there's transporters, there's enzymes making the neurotransmitter. So that's where like the EEG can help you see how that neurotransmitter is functioning. You can compare to neurotransmitter testing and stool testing to then really be able to navigate. It's actually pretty unbelievable bringing those together, how quick you can really get to what actually needs to be worked on, right? But while you were talking, I was thinking the old saying, trust your gut. So what's actually really interesting is a lot of the sensory receptors in the gut, there's a lot of connections to an area just inside our temporal lobe, like Frankenstein's spokes that he has. If you went right inside a couple inches, there's this area called the insula. And the insula is very connected to our heart and our gut. It also happens to be a volume knob for emotional content. So the louder that the gut is picking something up, it can send alarms going off in the insula, and it can make us feel overstimulated and overwhelmed. And so it can also be your best friend the gut, because it is sometimes the most sensitive to things going on, right? It doesn't always know exactly what it is, but it's like, okay, something doesn't feel right in my gut, right? And there is, but a lot of us, especially if we've struggled with digestive issues, there's actually a break in the bond between our gut and ourselves, because we're so like angry at our gut for not working like it should, and like and all. And actually, there's signals trying to be sent, but sometimes it sends you very deep into yourself. Like, I've seen a lot of people that had like really deep early developmental trauma that they didn't even have any conscious memory of, or they just never even thought about it. They were just like, I'm past it. Okay, we're here now. And the gut kept sending an alarm saying like this needs to be addressed, this needs to be dealt with, like this is ruling your entire life and you don't even recognize it, you don't even see it, right? And it sends you on this journey into yourself that's like completely liberating at the end. So
totally. Yeah. It's 7:45 now. If anybody has questions, feel free to pop them in the comments tab, and we'll get to those in a second here. I think I've only seen one come through so far. So if you have burning questions, please add that in. Would love to just kind of talk about some things that are really great to add or incorporate into the diet for people. For me, there's a few different areas. If you do not have current gut symptoms, these are really great things to add to your diet. If you have gut symptoms right now, they may make you feel worse, or you're like, oh, I actually can't eat any of those. That's a really clear indication that an assessment should be done for your gut health. And that comprehensive assessment, like we talked about, to kind of figure out areas that need to be tested, whether it's nervous system, gut. I mean, those two are probably both going to be tested, but maybe other areas that need some. My kind of like top 4 are reducing processed sugars in the diet. And this mainly comes from packaged foods. These feed a ton they feed a ton of those non-beneficial bacteria or yeasts that are in the gut. They are not beneficial to our beneficial bacteria. So the more that we can reduce those, and if we're baking at home, we're using sweeteners like honey or maple syrup, those natural sugars, way better for your gut than processed. Number 2 would be fiber. We try to hit an average of about 30 grams a day, which for most people in North America, that's quite a bit more than you might be eating. So you don't necessarily need to like weigh your food or anything, but we should be seeing that like half your plate is vegetables for lunch and dinner. And if you can get a variety of those different fibers, then that really, really helps to support feeding all the different beneficial bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract. Third one is fermented foods. So whether it's kimchi, sauerkraut, fermented beets, fermented carrots, those really, really help to just support feeding the beneficial bacteria in your gut. And then the last thing is resistant starches. The most research that's in this area is on resistant potato starches. These happen from starches that are cooked and then cooled. And that cooling effect, if anybody's ever made mashed potatoes and they eat them the next day, they're super sticky, or way stickier than they were before. Those resistant starches that form are very helpful to feed your Akkermansia species in your gut, which are super important, as well as your bifidobacterium species. So those are kind of my top 4 for overall gut health. And if we can incorporate those in the diet as often as possible, that's awesome. If you feel worse with those foods, that's a really good indication that there's something growing in your gut that shouldn't be in there. So we should probably look at some testing for that. Corey, I don't know if you have any others that you have for go-tos.
I do more on the drinking side. Get rid of chlorinated water, drink spring water, and alcohol. The highly problematic for microbiome balance. If you can't stop drinking alcohol, get a brain assessment so we can figure out why you're stuck with that, why you're using that to medicate. Because there's a lot of different reasons kind of in the neuropsychology and the levels of the psyche that are usually driving you towards that. And it can be pretty easily worked with. It's not like I used to think about it, where it was like, oh, people got to go to a treatment facility, and it's like it actually can be dealt with quite a bit simpler than that. So,
Yeah.
Well, do you want to get into the questions?
Yeah, why don't we dive into the questions? It looks like we've got quite a few that came through. So maybe I'll just read the first one out. Do either of you deal with the issue of biofilms in the gut as a root cause of hosting chronic bacteria or viruses? Would like to know about targeting that. Absolutely. This is very, very common that bacteria and some yeasts, when they're in the gut, they essentially build these mucous membranes around themselves, and that's what we call biofilm. And what biofilm is really helpful at for the bacteria is that it doesn't allow for the antimicrobial to actually get to the bug inside to kill it. And so often what we'll use are things that break open biofilms. We call them biofilm busters, where they essentially work to break that mucus capsule open so that an antimicrobial herb can be much more effective at actually killing the bacteria or yeast inside. Viruses aren't super common in the gut, but they can be there. They're just much less common than a bacterial overgrowth or a yeast overgrowth. We can't necessarily give like specific dosing recommendations in this, but things like N-acetylcysteine is a great biofilm buster. EDTA is another great biofilm buster. Those are the two that come always to my head. Corey, do you have any others that you commonly use?
Yeah, black walnut, lumbrokinase, or nattokinase is good too. I prefer lumbro. The biggest thing for me though is I go a step deeper and go, why was your battery so drained that some infection was able to build a biofilm inside of you? That's the deepest question for me, because this stuff doesn't just show up for no reason. It shows up because our battery's too drained. So it's not, this is where I see people get stuck in the endless loop of Lyme treatment. Is a next Lyme treatment, 10, 20 years later of treating Lyme directly, and nobody's addressed the problem with the battery. Right. So if you have biofilm growing anywhere, the biggest question to ask yourself is how did it get to this point that an infection was able to literally lay an entire biofilm down throughout my system? You still treat it, still absolutely, you still target it, but really look, how did it get there? Where was I giving my energy away, or where was I not making enough energy? Where was I in a misalignment there? So that's a deeper clinical assessment for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Next question. Can you talk about allergies to probiotics and what natural foods you can use instead? That's a great question. I have not often seen allergies to probiotics, so would be curious to understand what that allergy might be.
Yeah, me too, because I've seen certain probiotics be a trigger for mast cells.
Yes,
which I don't know if that's maybe something you're dealing with, Brenda, and you can either maybe just type a clarity in there, or but yeah, you can get like and like ideally natural forms of probiotics are the best, or like Dr. Smith would, like feeding them properly, giving them the light they need, giving them the light and the dark that they need to cycle themselves. It is really the best. You don't want to be on a probiotic long term ever. That's unless you've had like a substantial antibiotic use or something that you need to be on 6 months, 12 months, maybe max. You shouldn't need to. If you get everything else dialed in, you shouldn't actually, because you can actually create problems by adding, because we have millions of different species and strains of bacteria. We can never replace those perfectly. So you can always create some imbalance problems if you use them too long anyway. So I might even say it might even be your body's way of saying, no, actually we don't need a probiotic. Let's just go this way instead. So
yeah. And the feeding, Brenda, is more like getting the diversity in your diet in terms of the different fibers and fermented foods, if you can tolerate those. If you're not having an allergic reaction from those, are helpful. And then the resistant potato starches too would be a good idea.
yeah, she just said breaking out in rashes when I take the probiotics, and I can't get rid of the rash now. So that's something that's I see a lot more when like the immune system's so fired up that the mast cells start releasing histamine and leukotriene, all these things that trigger hives and rashes and cause leaky gut. And it's when things are like your immune system's freaking out more. So it would probably be good for you to get more of a clinical assessment there for sure.
Absolutely. Next question. You mentioned the nervous system. How can we heal the nervous system and come out of fight or flight?
So that is a unique snowflake-like experience for everybody.
Totally.
So we, as humans, we are multidimensional, meaning that we have an impact on and can be affected by our environment. We have an impact on and can be affected by our physical body. We have an energetic body, magnetic and electrical fields that are produced, biofields. We have an emotional body, which is magnetic. We have a intellectual body, which is our thought field, what's happening in our thoughts and what we're giving truth to, and stories and beliefs. And then we have a spiritual, intuitive body. And then we have a interpersonal body, which is our relationships. And all of those bodies can become stressed if they are not in alignment with our nature. So for me, I let nervous system assessments and the quantitative EEG be my North Star on that, of what dimension of our being we need to be looking at to get things out of the way that aren't supposed to be there, right? So in the interpersonal, are you in a toxic relationship? You're never going to heal while you're in that relationship. You'll need to leave that relationship to heal. Are you having problematic thoughts and emotions coming from a trauma memory that hasn't been processed yet? Got to process that, right? Are you having a circadian rhythm issue, energetic production issue? Are you having inflammation? What is it that's putting your nervous system into fight or flight? There's a lot of different things, but that starting with like honing in on what system do we need to be focusing on? And it's just about harmonizing that system. It's literally like tuning a guitar. It's like, oh, the E string's out of tune. Oh, it's too sharp. Okay, we gotta, all right, there we go. Now we're in tune, right? It's like that, but on every level of our being. And once you get that to a degree, a good enough degree, it doesn't need to be perfect, but a good enough, you come out of fight or flight. So I know that's really not giving you a very straight answer, but it's not a very straight answer, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally. Can you talk more about grounding and the alternative to a grounding sheet being plugged in? Corey, I'm going to let you take that one again.
Yeah, so grounding is, I mean, essentially being as close to the earth as you can, like bare skin if you can. The problem with this in winter in Canada is, of course, it's very cold. So you're not going to be able to stand out there for very long before your feet freeze. So you can get grounding sheets. My favorite are the ones that are cotton with silver fiber woven into them. And then they have a little clip that you clip a wire into. And then you can get what's called a grounding rod kit, which has like a tent peg-like rod that has another wire that you can run out the window, or if you want, some people drill like a hole through their wall just enough to get the cord through and then seal it and insulate it. We just put ours through our window, and it's a thin wire so you can close and seal the window over it. But then you're basically mimicking that you're laying on the ground while you sleep. And the closer you are to the ground, the more electrons you can bring back into your system, which is what runs the spark gap we call the electron transport chain, which is what allows you to make energy. I'm not going to go into the dynamics of the mitochondria because it's hydrogen fusion technology. It's incredible, but basically, yeah. So you're allowing electrons to come in. It's like electricity into the system so that you can make energy. When we get inflammation or we're ungrounded, so we're wearing rubber-soled shoes, or as soon as we get about an inch off the ground, the ability for us to bring electrons into our system drops exponentially. So as soon as you're 10 feet off the ground, you're hardly able to bring any more electrons into your system from the earth. So you're just leaking out, you're making energy, and then you're not replacing that, you're not allowing that flow of energy to keep moving through. So the grounding sheet helps you all night long, being grounded in that helps bring electrons into your system so you can keep moving that current through, and building those electron stores back up in your water, which is charging your battery essentially. So you just don't want to plug it into a ground port, because the ground port of a power grid doesn't work the same way as the earth does. So you're going to basically just send your electrons into the void of the power grid. It's not actually giving you electrons. So a lot of people get confused about how that works, but yeah, you don't want to plug it into the wall. So
yeah, makes sense. There's a few questions from Jazz here, which I think we could do the first two in the same response, and then the second two. But how do you distinguish whether brain fog is caused by your gut, hormones, sugar problem, or post-COVID? Are there other symptoms that can help you identify the root cause? Actually, I'll just start with that one. Great question. These can all be factors in terms of development of brain fog, but essentially, when you understand where different systems are being affected, and what different symptoms a patient might be presenting with. So if there are significant gastrointestinal symptoms or significant emotional regulation symptoms that might be coming up, or people feel really shaky after they eat, that might be a sugar problem. Pain with periods or menstrual cycle concerns might be more of a hormone concern. So going through a comprehensive intake helps you understand and piece together what might be imbalanced. And then comprehensive testing is really where we help to identify what is the imbalance in the body and how do we treat that appropriately. So that is kind of going back to that QEEG neuroanalysis that we often look at for looking at the nervous system, gut microbiome testing, where we're looking at stool analysis to build the makeup of the gut microbiome, understand are there beneficial bacteria in there, things growing in there that shouldn't be, is there inflammation in the gut. We can test for blood sugar regulation, look at hormone regulation as well. And then what's really helpful with QEEG neuroanalysis is for things like post-COVID or chronic inflammatory response syndrome that's triggered by COVID, and is a lot of this post-COVID that we're seeing now. We can pick that up often on a brain map, where we'll see signs of inflammation and patterns within the brain map that give us an understanding of, okay, we need to dive into inflammatory signaling responses. And so that's a different kind of aspect of testing and treatment that we may look at as well. But it's very multifaceted in terms of the way that we may choose to look into that. But first is the comprehensive intake to understand the symptom picture, and then next is comprehensive testing to really figure it out, and then comprehensive treatment protocols from there.
Yeah, and there's also a gene expression test called quantitative RNA sequencing by a lab called ProGene-DX down in Florida that we work with, and you can look at gene expression signature changes, or what we call epigenetic changes in the white blood cells, and you can see intracellular insulin issues, mTOR problems. You can see post-COVID. You can see mitochondrial behavior. You can't see what's going on in the gut. That does need to be looked at separate, and you can't see what's going on with hormones. But I would suspect too, like, you know, with post-COVID, if it is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, you can get all those other systems will fall out. And then the section of the brain being affected with brain fog depends. Brain fog's a tricky one, because it could be a working memory problem. It could be an executive function problem. It could be a sensory processing issue. It could be a cerebellum problem. And figuring out the area that's affected does help you better understand the cause as well. And that can be done through quantitative EEG, the brain mapping that Dr. Smith mentioned.
Yeah. When is best time to take probiotic to enhance gut repair? In my practice, I have people take probiotics at bedtime because that's when immune system is most active, right? And when all that repair is happening. So we have the best likelihood of actually getting a probiotic to colonize at that time. So usually before bed is when I recommend. Of course, if we're moving through a gut protocol where we have antimicrobial treatments plus a probiotic, we may have to shift that depending on what is doable for people. But in terms of just like overall when to take a probiotic, usually bedtime for me. Does the order of how you eat matter for gut repair and digestion? Should you eat vegetables first and carb last? No. In my opinion, eating a well-rounded meal is much more important, where we're getting good fibers, carbohydrates, good protein, and a good fat source, than eating certain foods throughout that. Like if we're eating well-rounded within the meal, and chewing our food really, really well, so that we allow for that proper breakdown, and then also focusing more on getting into that parasympathetic nervous system that allows for blood flow to come to your gut, allows for proper digestive enzyme secretion, so that we can break down our foods properly. I would put that at higher priority than the timing of vegetables versus carbs.
Yeah, the only time that I would really stack macros, and I mean most vegetables have carbs too, so but I think I know what you're saying. But the only time I would stack like fats, proteins, and carbs separate would be if someone had a really high degree of leptin resistance, where I would actually have them focus more on proteins and fats in the morning and then intro carbs later. But that not in a lot of cases. I wouldn't even worry about that. Yeah.
And like I think more so what you're saying, Corey, is like time of day of eating those versus timing in your meal. Right. Yeah. 2 questions about where we can get comprehensive gut testing done in Alberta. Most of this comprehensive gut testing, this is a specialty lab that we use down in the States for testing like this. It is not run through Alberta Health Services, unfortunately. We don't really have an option here in Canada for testing like this. If you see a naturopath or a functional medicine practitioner, you're very likely to have an opportunity to do testing like this. This is very common testing that we run at Neurvana Naturopathic Medicine. Corey and I are both super, super well versed in these gut microbiome tests. And it's really, again, kind of going through that comprehensive intake to understand, is it indicated for us to look at this area? And should this be an area of focus moving forward for testing? The stool analysis that we generally look at is a 3-day stool sample, and it gives us a really broad understanding of the gut microbiome because we get so much sample, which is great. There are other options out there for testing, but the stool analysis and over that 3 days is what we have found to be the most beneficial for our patient populations. Anything to add there, Cor?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, you're never gonna see this testing in Alberta because they're not really, they're about sick care. They're not really about health care. So they're gonna wait until things are so severe, or like they look at 6 different microbes in the gut because they're the ones that generally cause what they call disease. So they're going to miss a lot of stuff that's contributing to chronic issues, and mainly it's around the price. They can't afford to take care of everybody and look at it all in this much depth. So you're really on your own to invest in this on your own, and it is worth it. It is highly worth it. So
yeah.
And then
no, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say for the next question, but I'm not sure if you had anything more to say there.
No, I was gonna go on to the next question, so you go for it.
Yeah, so yeah, sulfatrim, depending on how long it's been prescribed for, and for what, like if it's very short-term use, I wouldn't worry too much about it. If it's longer than like a week, yeah, you're gonna start getting problems with killing off good bacteria, high risk of fungal overgrowth, and you also tend to damage your mitochondria, which is why I don't love long-term antibiotics. So if it's short-term, I'm not concerned about it at all. But yeah,
totally. I have UC and I'm on a biologic that has helped me stay in remission. I was diagnosed around the age of 60, so have only had this disease for 13 years. Is there a chance I could get off the biologic? Really hard to say, just from this information, Lorraine, but we do work with UC and different inflammatory bowel diseases. And if there are other contributing factors that are creating that inflammation in the gastrointestinal tract, if we can treat those effectively and have kind of the gut be in remission, there maybe there's a potential, but that it would require very in-depth understanding of the UC diagnosis, and then further testing to understand, is there something else driving inflammation in the gut that could be affecting this? There is quite good research on certain strains of probiotics that have been approved for things like UC. And then there's lots of different herbs and nutrients that also have great research on them to help reduce inflammation in the gut from UC specifically. And then again, there's lots of testing that we can look at to understand, is there something else that might be driving that? So more assessment would be required to really answer that question in much more depth, but certainly something that we work with at our clinic.
Yeah.
Fecal transplants, last-ditch treatment effort or witchcraft? There is a lot of emerging research about this area in particular. It's been approved for chronic C. difficile infections. This is something that you definitely want to make sure that you're getting from a source that has gone through rigorous testing before you're doing anything like a fecal transplant, because if you haven't gone through rigorous testing and there is some kind of inflammatory process happening in the gut or infection in the gut and you receive a fecal transplant from someone with those things, that could potentially be triggered in your gut. And so it's very imperative that that is done really carefully and has been, the fecal transplanter has been rigorously tested. So I believe, like, with this, they would refer for chronic C. difficile infections within Alberta Health. As naturopaths, this is not something that we have access to, or as functional medicine practitioner.
Yeah, and I would say, yeah, absolute last ditch effort. Like if you haven't looked at your nervous system, for instance, like don't do it. Like do other things. Look a little bit deeper, because yeah, but yeah, it totally, like if you get to the end of the line and you really like looked at your other systems and like really went through things, it's, people are having miracles happen. And people are also having the opposite. So it's just one of those things we don't know a ton about yet.
Yeah, so exactly. Is kefir plain considered a good fermented product? Yes, absolutely, especially when it's plain. All of the flavored ones have added sugars in them, so I don't recommend those. But a plain kefir, if your body is fine with dairy, is a great fermented food and something you can incorporate into your diet to help feed those beneficial bacteria. Next question. I agree it is important to support nervous system when needed. It is also important to be in situations where it doesn't get overstimulated. I like the info and knowledge about hormone, light exposure, probiotics, and protein synthesis. What is your perspective on rifaximin for bacteria overgrowth?
Yeah. I mean, previously considered the best for true SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. There are other natural products that are now coming close to comparison. which I do want to actually talk more about that, Dr. Smith. It's definitely more your
Yeah,
forte.
totally. I mean, it's definitely something that is often prescribed for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth and can work really well. What I often see with people that are prescribed rifaximin is that they're prescribed the rifaximin, they feel great, but then there's no further treatment done once they've finished rifaximin. And unfortunately, with things like SIBO, there's a really high reoccurrence rate. And so these things come back if you're not addressing overall gut health and reducing inflammation in the gut and adding in beneficial bacteria. If we just leave the environment the same after rifaximin, then oftentimes things come back. And rifaximin is an antibiotic that can only be used a total of 3 times, and then you are no longer a candidate for it. I often use antimicrobial herbs in my practice to treat things like SIBO or any kind of bacterial overgrowth. And I find they work really well. But again, when paired with healing protocols for the gastrointestinal tract and then assessing in other areas that might be affecting the gastrointestinal tract. So rifaximin can be a choice of treatment. Antimicrobial therapies can be a choice of treatment, but it's the second phase, once you've killed the overgrowth, that really needs to be assessed and treated for it as well to reduce the likelihood that these things come back.
And the most common cause of SIBO is dysmotility. The 2 most common causes of dysmotility is an aggravated centralized limbic response, which is a trauma response, which a lot of people will convince themselves they're not in when they really are. And the second is mitochondrial dysfunction. So if you don't get those 2 sorted out, you'll never get your motility problem resolved. You'll keep having recurring SIBO or SIFO. So that's my perspective on it. It's not always the case, but that's the most common that I see.
100%. And I mean, it makes sense, right? Like if we're not going to the washroom all the time or every day, things back up, right? And then that sphincter that essentially keeps the large intestine environment away from the small intestine, called the ileocecal valve, it becomes a little leaky, right? And then the bacteria can move up into the small intestine, which they are not supposed to be in there. Is S. bouillardi okay to take long-term? Saccharomyces bouillardi, this is a yeast that you can take in supplemental form. It's often recommended for people that are traveling so that you reduce the likelihood that you get traveler's diarrhea or some kind of infection in your gut when you're somewhere else. It's not necessary to take long-term, but it is not a colonizer of the gut. So essentially what you take, you will poop out. It does not actually colonize in the gastrointestinal tract. So if you're not traveling, it's not normally indicated to take something like S. bouillardi, but there wouldn't be any harm necessarily to taking it long-term. Should we take digestive enzymes? Sometimes they're beneficial if your body is not able to get into parasympathetic nervous system. It can help replace the digestive enzymes from your pancreas, as well as the stomach acid and the bile from your liver that may not be produced appropriately because your body is in fight or flight. So we're not focused on digestion. This is not a long-term solution to treating the issue. It's figuring out, okay, why is your body actually not secreting these digestive enzymes appropriately? Which would go back to kind of that QEEG neuroanalysis that we would probably want to look at for things like that. Corey, anything more to say on that question?
Not really. I mean, I literally take 0 supplements for anything. I think that like the long-term goal is get aligned with your nature, get your body into that regulated response and drop taking things like that, because they have an effect, right? Like there's this idea that supplements and everything are this like, oh, they're natural, let's take as many of them and whatever, like forever, it doesn't matter, right? And they all have an effect, right? So we're doing something, and like we just kind of got to ask, like, what am I doing with my, like, is my body doing something that it's is needing to do to maintain homeostasis, and then I'm trying to like mess with it, right? And this just comes down to exactly, you hit the nail on the head, Dr. Smith. It's just like, you know, look, especially if you're having issues going on, right? Like, kind of bridges us into the next question, like, how much is comprehensive gut testing? It depends on what you do, but usually between 700-800 and like 1100 to do like full comprehensive analysis, look at immune system regulation, inflammation, leaky gut, microbes that are important. So yeah, it's not cheap, but what I say is, like, it's an investment, because when you really look at it, what's your time worth? What is your time worth being in suffering? And how much are you putting towards all these other things that might not even be working? Like, I remember when I was struggling, I was spending like $3,000 or $4,000 a year on supplements as a student, and these other things that, like, oh, maybe this will work, and maybe that'll work, and then as soon as I like buckled down and finally just like did a brain map, looked at things, it was about the same price. And I figured out what it was. And in 6 months, I was way better. And I've just been uphill ever since, downhill, whatever the easier way is to go. I don't know. Anyway, I'm better. And it was like that. And the amount of suffering that I saved was, so like, I think that actually even bridges into the next question of like the support network. I think what you're asking is like, is there a cheaper way to do it? You know, again, it takes me back to like, what are you worth? You always got to ask this question, because there's an energetic to this as well. What am I worth? What is it? Is it worth making a sacrifice on these other things to actually get better? And also, there are things like Medicard, which offers like really, really, really affordable financing to be able to do stuff like this. But we're really at an age where the level of predictability that we have for outcomes is incredible if we actually look. And it's funny, because it is probably the biggest resistance that people have, because they're used to spending $100 here, $200 here, $300. That's no problem. I do that 100 times. But then when I see one thing that's 1,100, it's like, whoa. And it's like, well, let's look back. Like, wait, how much time off work have you had to take? How much have you spent here and here and here and here? Right. And really like looking at like it as an investment rather than somebody just pouring money down the drain. A lot of other things for me, it was like a lot of other things was me pouring money down the drain. It really was, you know. And so it was, I didn't think of it at the time in that way. But now I see it really clearly, like, oh yeah, I was totally chasing the next promise of certainty. And it wasn't until I actually bared down, saved my money, stopped spending it on eating out and this and that and the other thing. And then it was like, oh, wow, that was the trick. Cool. Imagine that. So.
Are there foods with naturally occurring akkermansia? That is a great question. This is usually something you do need to take in a probiotic form. However, there are a lot of foods that feed akkermansia. So what you already have in your gastrointestinal tract, those resistant starches, so the cooked and cooled potatoes are one. Other resistant starches would be things like cooked and cooled oatmeal. Anything that has that starch that becomes sticky, essentially. So oats or potatoes are our best bet. And then red berries are great for feeding akkermansia as well. So dark berry blends like raspberries and blackberries and blueberries, strawberries, those will all help feed akkermansia as well. So usually I have people incorporate those in the diet. You could add both of those, like you could have steel cut oats that are cooked and cooled with berries on top, and that's a great feeder for your akkermansia. And if you have some akkermansia in your gut, then that's going to help feed those so that they make proper immune system regulation and mucus barrier that protects from leaky gut, which is great. So those are the things I would recommend adding in, and then further testing helps you understand if you actually have enough or if you need to add in supplementally.
Yeah.
We will be sharing a recording of this webinar. That should go out to you guys in the next couple days from community. So where you signed up for this webinar should be in there, and then you guys can watch recording if you'd like. Just one last question here. Is there someone, sorry.
Support center for as a trauma practitioner, mitochondria. Yeah. So yeah, yes, Jessica, thanks for the clarity. We have a practitioner that focuses on trauma. And the biggest thing with trauma is learning about integrating that part of yourself. Because a lot of people are, trying to work to like get rid of the trauma or desensitize the trauma or try to, but the most important is learning about the part of you that is stuck in that and how it's affecting your current day reality. And you actually work within yourself to reprogram it. It's really cool. So one of my favorite techniques is internal family systems. And when you couple it with neurofeedback, it's like incredible. So yes, long story short. Thank you all for your great questions. Really helped and spurred a lot of good conversations. So thank you.
Agreed. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you guys so much for joining us tonight on this webinar. We'll get that recording out to you guys ASAP. And if you're ever curious about learning more about comprehensive testing and everything, you know where to find us. We're at Neurvana Naturopathic Medicine. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.